like to thank everyone for coming. I think most everyone in here knows me. I'm Josh. I worked for Provo for 13 years and retired early. Some people say quit. I say retired.
Thank you.
Sam finally got that seniority spot he's been aching for. Anyways.
Can you say off and on for 13 years?
Off and on. Well, if I hadn't left for a year, I would have 14 years on, because I hired in 2002. Yeah, I did leave for a little while. Anyways, so I do this, and then I work for AirMed, so it's pre-hospital type stuff where we're dealing with the same kind of things that everyone is in the emergency services. Scary calls, getting up in the middle of the night. Yeah. So and then I worked in the hospital environment as well. I've been in the ER for quite a few years and in the ICU. So this whole thing actually came about because I have struggled with depression, and I've been talking to some of the guys about it, and to Devin, and he thought that it would be a good idea, and I agreed, that we put on a small training for B platoon. And then the more we kind of worked it through and talked about it, we wanted to make it bigger and kind of invite more people because it's really a good message that we're going to share today. Anyways, so just quick how I ended up here. A few years ago, it was back in like 2012. I had a foot injury, and I used to run quite a bit, and all of a sudden I wasn't able to run anymore, and I just started feeling a lot of stress at home, and I just kind of felt kind of in a cloud a little bit, and I'd fight it. And one day I just decided I was sick of fighting it, and I just felt like I let myself fall into this pit. And once I had made that choice to quit fighting it, I was like just in darkness. I'd come home from work and I'd go just lay in bed all day. I had a hard time engaging with my family. I spent a lot of time thinking about suicide. It was pretty therapeutic for me to come up with cool ways to kill myself, exciting ways, because if you're going to die, you want to have a good story of how you died when you get to the other side. But then, I had already committed I was never going to kill myself because I couldn't do that to my kids. I couldn't leave them without a dad. And so as that reality hits, when I'm fantasizing about suicide, I just get more depressed because I felt like there wasn't a way out. And the stupid thing is, I had nothing to be depressed about. I had a beautiful wife. Financially, we were fine. We didn't have a lot of debt. I had a great job at the fire department. Wonderful kids. There was no reason in my life to be depressed. And my wife and I were seeing a counselor, and after a few months, she started seeing the signs of depression, and she recommended that I go take some pills, and I was against that. In the fire service, it seems like everyone we go on is on antidepressants, and I always just, wrote that off as they just, it's a crutch for them. They don't really need it if they just get off their butt and go out and exercise or do something. And but finally, they convinced me, and I started on medication, and it actually helped quite a bit. I'd feel, before I had started on it, sometimes I'd feel so depressed it would hurt to try and come to work and put on a smiley face or go to a family party. It was just, I just wanted to stay home. And so the meds started helping with that, but I still felt like I wasn't back to where I had used to been. My wife was really concerned, obviously, and I wasn't doing anything about other than taking my pills, and sometimes I just wouldn't fill my prescription. And so it was still hard, so she started looking for a therapist for me to see. And she got on Aetna's page, because that was our insurance, and found Doug, and he was accepted by our insurance. That's the only thing I knew about him, so I started going and visiting him. And if Aetna covers it, he's probably not that good, is what I thought. But I went there, and Doug and I really clicked. I don't know, our personalities kind of matched. I enjoyed being with him. He'd give me crap. I wouldn't just come in, oh, my life's so hard, and him pat me on the back. He wouldn't take that. He would kind of bring me to my senses. And early on in our visits, he started talking to me about the stresses of my job as a firefighter. And I was like, I don't really have any stress as a firefighter. I enjoy it, and I see, you know, things all the time. They don't bother me. I mean, I did CPR on a kid the other day. It didn't bother me. I knew the kid was going to die, and he did die, and I was fine with that. And you know, it just, those kind of calls don't really affect me. So I don't know what you're talking about. And he's like, you're kidding me. You don't know this? He says, this information's been around for years. It's not necessarily the calls that affect you this way. It's the lifestyle. It's the lack of sleep. It's the surges of adrenaline. And I'll let him go into more of the stuff that he kind of opened my eyes to. And all of a sudden I realized that this job had kind of led me into that depression. And so I've been seeing Doug for a few years now, and he's been a good friend, and even as I feel a lot better now, I feel like I'm back to my old self, but it's still nice to go and talk to him because he's like a friend, but he also has training and, you know, seeing problems and helping you work through your problems. So it's been really good. And after the stuff that he told me, I realized I had no idea, and I figured most of us have no idea, so I really wanted, it'd be nice. I've actually referred a few of our firefighters to him, and they've gone to him and have really enjoyed him, but he's a busy guy and he doesn't have time to see everyone, and I doubt you would all go if I gave you his card anyways. So I thought if I could bring him here and have him kind of share with you what he shared with me, then hopefully it could make a difference. And even if you're not depressed, some of these things can prevent issues, can prevent depression, and can just make your life better. So that's kind of how we ended up here. And yeah, Doug, I know he's done a lot of things. I don't really have his resume, but I'll let Doug kind of tell a little bit about himself and then jump into this here. So thank you.
Thanks, Josh, and thanks for your honesty and openness. We're not going to be super formal. If you feel the need to get up and grab a treat or a drink while we're talking, it won't bother me at all. If you are going to go for one of the energy drinks, though, you might want to do that now, because if you do it later, you might feel a little shame when we're talking about some of the problems with that. So let me just get a feel. Who's here? Firefighters? Spouses. Way to go, spouses. Nurses, EMTs, police, dispatchers,
Victims advocates.
and victims advocates. Who have I missed? That's who I'm talking to? Okay. So I'm driving here this morning. I live in Cedar Hills, which is way out there now. It's really hard to get anywhere in this valley anymore. I went to classes in this building in 1973. It was about to fall down shortly before they abandoned it. I've only been back a couple of times, but it's amazing how much better it looks now than way back then. So I'm driving this morning, trying to be unlike myself and leave early enough to get here on time. And I'm heading down the road through American Fork, and sure enough, I see the flashing lights up ahead. Big fire truck blocking the road, traffic slowing down. And, I'm starting to curse a little under my breath, and then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. This is who I'm going to be talking to. So I got myself under control, but I try not to rubberneck and slow down traffic, but you can't help but look. And I could, there was an ambulance and a police car, and they were working on some people on the side of the road. And it was actually just, that nice reminder to me of how grateful we are that you people are here. And so even though sometimes your flashing lights annoy us, down deep, we're really glad you're here. So I'm happy to be with you this morning. Um, I'm assuming most of you must not have grown up with country music, or at least your mothers must not have, or else they just didn't listen to Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings when they sang, "Mamas, don't let your boys grow up to be cowboys and firefighters. Let them be doctors and lawyers and stuff. You know, accountants, now that's a nice, calm, safe job. The only real danger with being an accountant is dying of boredom, unlike you guys." So long ago when I was younger, I was a ranger for the National Park Service at Timpanogos Cave. And one day we were, I know about when you guys sometimes get to go play in fire towers and, you know, you do the fun stuff. So after the cave was closed, we were going to do some training, or playing around as we called it, where we got to rappel in through the natural entrance to middle cave, you know, and drop the 100 feet and do some exploring and rappel in the back pits and all that. It was my day off, so I had just walked up, you know, late in the afternoon to get in on the training while, you know, when the cave was closed. And so by the time we were through exploring and messing around, and we're heading down the trail, and now it's dark. You've all been on the Timpanogos Cave Trail, right? And I've had to walk down it in the dark. It's usually not a big thing. There was no moon that night. And so I was walking down with a ranger who had been on duty. And so she had her flashlight. And as we're walking down the trail with her flashlight. And this was in the fall. And particularly in the fall, sometimes you'll get rattlesnakes that will come on that asphalt trail, you know, for the heat. And because it's a national park, you can't, you know, kill them. You just have to get them away so the visitors aren't in danger. And the day before, the last ranger coming down the trail at the end of the day saw a rattlesnake in the trail. And so she did what we do, you know, was shuffling her feet, trying to make some noise and some movement, and you know, hopefully it would just move, so that she didn't have to, you know, get the stick to move it and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't know why, it was just a crazy rattlesnake. It got aggressive and was coming toward her. And she was, you know, backing up and moving away. Well, obviously the story had made the rounds, you know, over the next day about this rattlesnake, you know, coming aggressively at the rangers trying to get it off the trail. You know, we're all like, did you hear this? Did you hear about the snake yesterday? Kind of thing. It's just not what they usually do. So I'm walking down the trail in the dark. We're using her flashlight, and all of a sudden her flashlight goes out. And I'm like, Judy, what's going on? And you know, she's shaking it, and she's like, well, it wasn't the batteries. You could see those were bright, and I know I had them charged. My bulb must have gone out. And I don't have a lot of phobias, but I'm not real fond of rattlesnakes. And we've been talking about the crazy rattlesnake the day before, and it is just after dark, which is the time they're most likely to kind of camp on the trail to hold in the warmth of that. So the thought crossed my mind, oh great, you know, not only are we walking down in the dark, which isn't too big a deal, we know, you know, where the switchbacks and things are, but hope that, you know, crazy rattlesnake's not around. Just a minute or so later, I hear this rattling right behind me. You can imagine what I did. I wish that Provo Channel 17 had been there and there had been lights, because I'm pretty sure I set some high jump records right there. I mean, I went in the air and was ready to run, down this dark trail. And you know what's going on with me, my heart's beating, you have that sense of panic. And then my friend just starts laughing. And, what's going on? So you remember those old 35 millimeter plastic film can, that film used to come in? If you put a little rice in one of those and shake it, it sounds a lot like a rattlesnake. And so this was all a setup. We played a lot of jokes on each other up there. I did more than my share, and so, it's the get even. And she knew that I was a little skittish about rattlesnakes. So it was all a setup. Her flashlight was fine. She had the canister and the rice. The set, the time, everything had just come together this will be a great time to get Ranger Doug. But when that happened, do you know what was going on inside of me? Do you know the process with the brain and the body when something like that happens? Anybody feel like they could tell me a couple of the basics that goes on when you're having a moment like that?
I will. You get a surge of your catecholamines to get your body ready for whatever's about to come. Your epinephrine, your norepinephrine releases to speed up your heart rate, get your vision right, get blood through the muscles, and take blood away from where it doesn't need to be right now.
Great. So I'm sure you've all heard the term fight or flight syndrome. We have this safety syndrome in us. When great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather went out to get the food for the day, he also had to be worried about the food getting him. And so we evolved this safety system, which when it's triggered, can give us a little extra burst of strength or of speed that we may need to stay safe. But civilization has evolved faster than human physiology can evolve. We now live in the safest time in history, partly thanks to you guys. Even compared to 100 years ago, when my parents were born, from the level of civilization, the kinds of laws we have to protect ourselves, the changes in engineering and the way we build things, our smoke detectors, police force. This is really a safe time. For a few people who may, live in a particularly bad area, they may not feel quite so. But most Americans, and the truth is most people around the world, are living at the safest time in history. So that safety system that's in us, we don't need all that much. And in fact, we're not designed to use it all that much. A little part of the brain called the amygdala. It's, a crude analogy would be it's like a smoke detector. And I'm sure you guys know, they seem to have gotten better, but I can remember when we first started getting smoke detectors, I can't tell the difference between burnt toast and a real fire. And, we were always having to go reset them. And the amygdala is that way. It's not a thinking part of the brain, it's a reacting part of the brain. And it's designed to react instantaneously, those milliseconds that we can't even keep track of. Because if there is real danger, there may not be a lot of time for processing. So the amygdala sets off that alarm, and it goes through the hypothalamus and out to the rest of the brain and triggers this stress system, this safety system, which includes things that Josh was talking about. So we're getting a chemical dump in us. The brain is not only becoming more alert, but it's dropping cortisol and adrenaline that we may need. It actually conserves energy. It holds oxygen for a second or two, so that it's ready for this burst if we need it. So that's all really natural. It's just a part of us. It's built in us primarily to keep us safe. But we are not designed to have that happen very often or in really large doses. And when you get that chemical dump, it takes a while for the body to burn that off and get back to a place of stasis. So every time somebody shakes a film canister with rice behind you, it's triggering this system that's really nice to have if you actually need it for safety, but otherwise isn't all that good for us. It usually leaves us with some bad after effects. So you folks are in a profession where the nature of the job means you are having that happen much more often than an accountant. And you've got to know how to deal with that, as well as Josh said, just be in a good place overall to stay emotionally and physically healthy. We are now aware, I talk about going to this building back in 1973, the things that I was learning in psychology classes then compared to what we know today about the brain and the body, it's just worlds apart. The last 10 to 20 years, with the PET scans and the fMRIs that we didn't have, and just other research, the advances we're making in terms of our understanding of the brain and the connection between the brain and the body, between physical health and emotional health, we've come a long way. We've still got a lot to learn, but it's hard to keep up. But I try to keep up on the research, and I just marvel at what we know now that was never mentioned when I was first studying psychology back in the 70s. So we're going to talk a little today specifically about how to deal with those stress reactions and get them back to a relaxation reaction. And we're going to talk a little about overall health and the ways to maintain good physical and emotional health that hopefully will help keep you all a little healthier, a little happier, and so able to do your job well. And feel free to ask questions anywhere along the way. I'll try and leave some time at the end for some Q&A then as well.
So one of the things that you had told me, because even after you told me about this stress response and how when it's happening frequently, it's unhealthy, but probably, after a couple of years here at the fire department, I didn't really feel like I had that stress response anymore. And I mean, now at AirMed, every time the tones go off, I poop my pants because the calls scare me to death. So I am having that more now, but at Provo, maybe that big fire that comes in every once a year or some major mass casualty. Other than that, I wouldn't really get that stress response, or so I felt.
It's a good point. I'll give you an example from my profession. When early in my profession with doing therapy, the first time I ever dealt with a sex abuse situation, it was not the ideal first case to ever deal with. So I dealt with it some when you're in training and things, but it's not until you actually get out there. I don't know if it's the same with the police or fire academy and when you're actually on the job. But what you get in training is helpful, but you're not really there. So the first time I was dealing with a sex abuse situation, there were actually 5 victims in one family. And, and I'm going through the interviews and dealing with this. I left work as soon as I could afterwards and went home. And my wife said, "What's wrong?" I said, I just need to take a nap. And I went and laid down and slept for 4 hours. And that it had just taken it out of me. I mean, I was really aware. I remember thinking, man, I guess I'm not going to be able to treat sexual abuse because you can't, take a 4-hour nap every day, when you've seen a bad situation. Well, we both get smarter and we adapt somewhat. And so I went from limiting myself to 1 abuse case at a time to 2 to 3 to I don't even pay any attention. All my patients could be abuse victims, and I would be fine because I've adjusted somewhat to that. And I think that happens with you guys, but I suspect that part of what happens is you also just aren't noticing it as much. Because when I stop and slow down, I'm touched just as much when I'm dealing with an abuse victim now as I was then. I may be not quite as shocked, because you begin to get a little bit immune to it, but underneath, I am having an emotional reaction to that. And so it's a combination of some intelligent adjustment, but also probably just losing some awareness, even though it's there. And it's a good point. We'll actually kind of address that and what we're going to do next. So you don't have your handcuffs with you, I presume. Well, they wouldn't work anyway, so we'll use my handcuffs. I need some volunteers to come up front for a minute. You want to, if you feel pretty agile and flexible, but anyone can do this. And the only other thing you need is courage, and I already know you all have that. So can I get 4 people up here? Thanks for volunteering, Josh. Who are you going to bring with you?
Captain Tommy T.
Okay.
Dave, yay.
Okay, Captain. We got it. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to cuff you. And we're going to cuff you to him. Okay, we're going to cuff you. And you.
Together in this, Dave.
Okay, your challenge is to separate yourselves. You may not take it off your wrists. So you've got to separate yourselves without cutting the cord or in any way taking the cord off.
Is it possible?
Of course it's possible. I wouldn't give you an impossible challenge, would I?
Plie. I'm back where we were. We're worse. We're worse. We're right
There's got to be something.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is possible.
Yeah, it looks like a BYU game. It's like something students do for fun.
You know what?
Just an excuse to get close.
I'll be honest with you, it is absolutely possible.
It is?
It is.
I did tell you you could take one.
We did it.
You lied. You did.
You didn't.
That was cute though.
Okay, will you keep your eye on them, make sure they don't cheat? You keep your eye on them and make sure they don't cheat, okay? Watch every move.
Keep going.
See, Josh has quit trying to figure out how to solve it. He's now in his, I think I can outsmart Dr. Doug if I just pull a fast one here.
I know in those things you like do a twist. Yeah. That's not good. I don't know, just try an arm cross. And that's just
So while they're working on this, let me just tell you a little more about the brain and how it works. The brain. So when they asked me to speak, they actually said that what we need in Provo is a little more togetherness,
Josh, put your
a little
arm
more
around.
closeness and connection.
there you go, pretty good. Secure. Good thing we're secure. We're still there. Pretty brilliant.
All right, they're entertaining enough. I'm not going to be able to tell you anything about the brain while they're doing this. Would you like a hint?
Yes.
That is the key.
Don't help it. I think we should reach out and call a friend.
Does anyone think they may have it figured out and could help?
Come help us out. I'll call a fire.
If you think you've got an idea for them, feel free to come up and share it with them.
Put your hand down. That hurts a bit more. Ah! That's what we were doing. Wrong key. So try the key. Slide it off. That's gotta be it. You gotta slide them through, right? What if that was what if this goes? Well, they're stretching.
We now have a choking hazard.
You're still on.
We're still. Put that over. Okay, big small. Well,
Josh, Google has so many opportunities for you. There you go.
okay. I got a little too twisted. Okay, that's small. So we can't take it off the wrist. Can't take it off. Can't take it off the wrist. Ta-da! Okay, well, we're on the right track. So.
There's no way to get my body through that. I'm sorry.
The only rule is we can't take it off the wrist.
You can't cut it, can't take it off the wrist.
What if we did it? Come on.
Okay, now, we're not quite through with you yet. Okay? So that Josh and the captain can't see, I need you to go back in the corner and do it again, okay? Great, come on back up. Okay? So you caught the difference in time that it took them between the first and the second time. We'll have you do it once more.
Oh, wait over. It's gotta be count. It's gotta be. Let me do it on.
Now you got it twice.
Sorry, I've already read it. Okay. Pass that through. It's gotta be noticed.
We thought we had it figured out.
Great. One more time.
So.
Thanks, Dylan.
If we were going to meet again tomorrow, and we brought these same 4 guys up, and we had them do it, you might see what you saw with those 2 guys, where they went for it once and it wasn't quite there, but they quickly resolved it. If we did it again the next day, they would get it like that, you know. But if we waited a year, you know, if we just did this today and then we waited a year and did it, they would come back and they would remember, okay, it's not the big gyrations, you know, but what did we do? But they would pretty quickly remember and figure it out again. If we waited another year and came back, they would get it really quick. The brain is a creature of habit. You can see this throughout our lives. You watch a little child taking their first step. You know, I don't know if this is just because I'm a psychologist. It probably could happen with any of you. I can just see their brain churning. You know, it's you know, they're there and they've got their hand on the table or the chair, and there's that, you know, that tentative step, and then, you know, then they fall down, and then you watch them try it again, and you can just see, you know, the brain with the balance, and, you know, the heel and the foot and kind of thing. And then pretty soon it's 3 steps and then 4 steps. The brain is wiring every time they try that, and learning from the mistakes and the successes, and pretty soon that child is walking and then running. You know, when's the last time any of you thought about taking a step? We just do it because it's wired into the brain. It's a pretty simple example. It's the difference. You know, my office has been in the same place for about 20 years. When I get up and get in my car and drive to work, I get to work, I haven't thought about driving there at all. Conscious thinking, unless there's a fire truck or an ambulance, you know, something that's, you know, or I have to come to Provo instead of American Fork. I had to consciously think a few times about driving here today. But when I drive to work every day, my brain just says, hey, got this. Now, if I have to stop at the store or go to the bank or something, half the time I'll drive by, and then it's like, oh, you know, I needed to go to the store, so I've got to go a different way. The brain is a creature of habit. It likes to conserve its energy, and it does that by wiring these neural pathways in our minds. And we have about 80 billion brain cells, and about 80 trillion connections and pathways. So if it's the first time for something, the brain is having to give it its full focus. But as it repeats it, it wires a pathway so it's just done. I don't know if this is a bad analogy, but let me try for a fire department analogy. You go on a call, you have some water in your truck, right? And you hook the hose up to that, and you can do something with that. But the bigger picture is, where's the hydrant? And do we have this system in place that can get water to anywhere in the city that we might need it? That's kind of like the brain. That here and now brain chemistry is like the water in your truck. Here's what I've got right now, right at this moment. But longer term, I need this bigger system. So as we talk about the brain, think of it in that way. Here and now brain chemistry, what am I feeling right at this minute? What's affecting that? But how do I get the good brain chemistry wired into the structure of my brain? Okay? So, I'll pick on Josh again, but he's talking about his depression and, just kind of was there, and it keeps building, and it just becomes a part of his life. It seems kind of crazy because the brain knows depression doesn't feel good, but it does what we tell it to do. So if someone is being depressed every day, the brain wires itself for depression. It's saying, well, doesn't feel good, but she's going there all the time, he's going there all the time, so we need a pretty big on-ramp and a 6-lane freeway for depression. The same for anxiety, and this is where, the danger in your job, because you're having these safety responses all the time, these stressful responses, and so the brain gets wired for that, and that wiring in that structure of the brain is there when you're not at work. It's there when you're sitting at the station, not on a call, and so you can be moving a little more in that direction without even being aware. And then, I like the way Josh said, it just becomes a part of you, and it's there naturally. So you want to pay attention to the here and now brain chemistry, bring it back to a good place as often as you can, because then you're getting that underlying structure with all of those neural pathways, all of those connections, that water system, that's going to get water to wherever you need it in the city. You want that wired for good brain chemistry. What's not making sense so far? You with me? Okay. Well, let's talk about ways to just be healthy overall, and we'll come back and tie it into, just shoot those.
Not get one.
Hey, Josh.
So we're gonna talk big picture, but we'll try and hone in on some of the specifics as it ties into you. So the handout you have is 10 keys to emotional and physical health. And again, it turns out we now know, we used to think of the brain and the body, the mind and the body, somewhat separately. What we've learned over the last few decades is the absolute interconnection between them. The less physically healthy you are, the more susceptible you are to poor emotional health. The worse your emotional health, the more susceptible you are to bad physical health. And we'll talk a little about the immune system and some ways that that comes into play. So we're gonna work through these. We're gonna do some of them really quick, and we'll spend a little more time on some others. If you were going to make one choice for health and one choice only, you said, hey, I don't care enough about my long-term health to do a whole bunch of stuff. Just tell me the one thing to do that would make the most difference. I'll live with the consequences. The number one thing would be don't smoke cigarettes. That is the number one correlate for long-term physical health. And again, physical health affects emotional health. So if you don't want to do everything, that's the one thing you would do. Okay? So don't smoke. If you do smoke, quit smoking. Thrown in with that would be avoid at least some drugs. If you're over 25 and you're living in a state where it's legal and you want to smoke pot twice a year, that would be okay. If you're under 25, you should never smoke marijuana. If you're over 25, you shouldn't smoke it more than 3 or 4 times a year. A couple of times would keep you safe. So it doesn't have that same impact as if you're a half a pack or 2 pack a day smoker. But frequent use isn't good for anyone. Occasional use isn't good for anyone under 25. If you're really, yeah.
How long does it take to clear your system?
Time. I'm from Colorado. I know, but you come back to my tongue.
The half-life of THC is about 30 days. So that's why I say you can do it twice a year. Because if you're doing it once a month, and you know where THC is the part of marijuana that makes you high, and it's also the bad part of marijuana. And do you know where it stores? Fat. It's fat soluble, not water soluble. What are some of the fattiest parts of your body? Brain. Boobs. Breasts. You're on the right track. Go with some more in that area. Testicles and ovaries. And lungs. So that's where it's stored when it goes in. And so over that 30 days as it's breaking down. So if you're smoking weed once a month, you have a constant supply in those fatty areas of your body, and it's doing some harm. The reason that under 25 should never do it is because the frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex are developing up until about 24, 25, and it does have some negative effects on those. It is true that it can make you stupider.
I assure you, it makes you plenty stupid.
And so while the brain is still developing, it's just not a good thing to have it in there. So, as a practical matter, if I were king for the day, I would make it legal for those 25 and older, but you had to have a card that you could only get 3 or 4 hits a year, which wouldn't work. We'd still all have it all the time anyway. But okay, so that's number one. The next 2 you already know about: diet and exercise. And we're not talking about crash diets, but just be sensible in your diet. Diet is a longer term effect unless there's something really dramatic. You're not noticing anything from it in the short run, but it is having an effect in the long run. And so just throughout your life, you want to be reasonably consistent about diet. So if you want to have a monster or rock star every now and then, that would be okay. But you actually don't want to be doing that every day. It's just not healthy. And that does particularly come back and play into the emotional health and dealing with anxiety. So, you know, you do a sensible diet. Exercise. Again, I think for most of you, just as part of your training and what's going on, you're probably doing better than the rest of us in the general population. And when we talk about exercise, it doesn't need to be extreme. The latest info is more frequent is better than less frequent, even if less frequent, you're doing it more intensively. So if you're picking the, you know, going for more of the ideal, rather than a 60 or 90-minute workout 3 times a week, you would go with a 45-minute 4 times a week, 5 times a week, or even 6 or 7 times a week, even though it's a little less. And it should be a mix of strength and cardio. Depending on your age and status, usually it should lean a little more in favor of the cardio, a little less on the strength. And with age, that becomes even more so. So if you're young and really fit, you could be doing 50% strength and 50% cardio. But if you're getting a little older, you want to kick the cardio up a little bit. So those are basics. You guys probably all know that. Any questions about diet or exercise? Okay, the next one can really come into play because you guys have weird shifts. You know, you work these long shifts. You may be getting a chance to sleep some during a shift, but it's usually not very regular. Here's a little quirk about our brains. And I'll ask you if you're brave enough to just answer this question. How many of you would say you have any trouble falling asleep, staying asleep, or getting enough sleep? Almost every hand in the room.
Normally, or is a beeping noise and the light comes on above my bed?
Yeah. So this is just one of those where you're at risk, but it is really critical. So severe sleep deprivation can have some fairly quick impacts. If you're going 4, 5, 6 days with severe sleep deprivation, we can see some effects right away. Most of us aren't experiencing that. We're just experiencing a little bit where we're not getting enough sleep or it's irregular, but that's happening over a long period of time. And the cumulative effects of that are adding up. And so if you can be a good sleeper and get enough sleep, it's going to be a benefit to your overall health. But again, you have these shifts and situations that get in the way of that. So here's a little quirk about the brain. For some reason, the human brain is actually programmed for a 25-hour day instead of a 24-hour day. We know this from a couple of places. One is those weird kind of studies we do where we put people in a room with no natural light, no clocks. We leave them. They just slip into the pattern that feels natural to them. Most of them will slip into a 25-hour wake-sleep cycle instead of a 24. When they have no idea of where the sun is or what the clock says, the brain goes to a 25-hour cycle. The other place we've learned it is from cavers. And you heard I used to be a park ranger and I've done some caving. But when we go in to map caves, a new cave is discovered, and we have some really massive cave systems in the U.S. So the most recent one I'm aware of is Leche Guia Cave in New Mexico, near Carlsbad Caverns, and it stretches. It has hundreds and hundreds of miles of passageways, and was just discovered a few decades ago. It's actually still being mapped. Because when the cavers go in to map, they start mapping from the entrance, and then they're gradually working their way back. but they're measuring every formation, every passageway, checking everything out. It's really this elaborate process. And so, soon they're 5 miles in, 10 miles in, 15 miles in. So they usually go in for 10 days to 2 weeks, and then they come out. But as it gets further back, it can take them 3 or 4 days just to get to where they're going to map, because you're crawling and twisting and bending. And whenever new caves are discovered, with the ethics of caving today, efforts are made to keep them really pristine, more so than caves that were discovered 100 and 200 years ago. So when they come to a body of water, the cavers will actually strip down naked, put their clothes in a pack above their head to move through the water, because we leave less stuff from our skin than we do from clothes. If these are pools that are still and not moving, and you're moving, people are walking through them with clothes and shoes and things, they quickly become clouded and dirty. If you go through them naked, you do leave a little bit, but not as much. And so when they do that, they're taking their watches off, and again, you're not really on the clock, so to speak. You're not there to work an 8-hour shift. You keep mapping and exploring and mapping until you're tired, and then you go to bed, and then you wake up and you do some more. And a lot of times they don't put their watches back on, and they'll move into a 25-hour cycle. It's like we were beamed here from a 25-hour planet. But the brain is a creature of what? Habit. So if you're doing a 24-hour wake-sleep cycle, you train the brain to be on a 24-hour cycle, whereas you may be one of those people who would otherwise go to a 25-hour. So when you're working unusual shifts and not getting that, then your brain isn't training in that way to be a really good sleeper. And that leaves you then susceptible. It's a little harder to fall asleep, or you may be waking up at a time when you would have been. So that's just something that all of you have to find ways to overcome. How am I gonna manage this so that I keep myself in as good a shape as I can by getting the right amount of sleep? Questions about that? Is it okay to take a nap? Sure. If you need to be alert after the nap, the nap shouldn't go more than 30 minutes, though. If you go past 30 minutes, you're moving into a cycle where you're likely to wake up a little more groggy.
What about Ambien? Is that something, a safe thing to take every night, or is that something you should take only sparingly?
My advice would be sparingly. Okay. The same thing is true. There are over-the-counter sleep medications that are effective and considered fairly safe. But like anything you're ingesting, even if it's a prescription drug, has the potential for side effects. And some of those may be long-term, and so to take it for a little while. If you need it, if you can't get sleep without it, that's a bigger risk than taking the medication. But if you can limit it, whether it's prescription or over the counter, you're probably a little better off. Other questions about sleep? All right.
I got one.
Yeah.
You said only nap for 30 minutes. What happens if you're trying to play catch up?
So I said only 30 minutes if you don't care about waking up alert. If you've got the day off and you need to catch up and you want to take a 2-hour nap and you don't care if you wake up alert, there's nothing wrong. There's no problem with that. Okay? You don't want to, by the way, just be getting 2 hours here, up for 2 hours, 2 more hours sleep, up for 2 hours, because then you're not going to get through all of the sleep cycles that are actually part of what keeps us healthy.
That just killed us every night. Take 3 calls and that's 2 hours.
Yeah, and so it's better than not getting any, but at some point you've got to get to that 7, 8, 9 hours, whatever it is you need. So, because it's in going through all of those sleep cycles that some of the stuff is happening in the brain that keeps us healthy. And if you're only sleeping 2 hours, you're not going to get through all of them.
I think he was just trying to get confirmation for his captain to let him sleep for.
From what I hear, captains get to do whatever they want. But yeah. So again, it's part of why you should have chosen accounting, but you didn't.
Accounting's so interesting.
Yeah. So you just have to figure out how am I going to deal with this as best I can. But it's a natural hazard of your profession. Yes.
So I'd have to say, just for the firefighter lifestyle, I think really the only way that you can deal with that is making sure that on your 4 days off, you're getting that full 8 hours of sleep. That's the time where you can try and catch up, but I think that's a really important time.
And you need to know how much sleep you need. We talk about 8 hours. That's sort of the standard, the average. But it isn't true for everyone. There are a few people, a very small minority, who really can function and do well and don't seem to have negative effects from 5 or 6 or even 7 hours. But if you think you're one of those, you're probably not. You might be, but you're probably not. And you may be someone who needs 8.5 or 9. And the best way I can tell you to figure out what you need is if you're on vacation or you have a gap of 4 or 5 days where you can ignore the clock, so to speak, go to bed at the same time every night. Don't have an alarm in the morning. And by the 4th or 5th, maybe even the 3rd day, depending on what your sleep was before, you'll wake up at the time that's natural, and then you look and say, okay, how long did I sleep for? You can't tell the 1st or 2nd day because you may be in catch-up mode. But by the 4th or the 5th, you'll kind of be in that natural mode if you've gone at the same time. That tells you how much you need for sleep. All right, now we're going to get to some of the others that are really germane for you guys. It's true for everyone. And stress. We're not looking for a stress-free lifestyle. Stress is natural. It can be part of what motivates us. But if you're frequently feeling a lot of stress, and this now goes back to that safety system that kicks in, but that can be detrimental to us. If you're under a lot of stress, it is taking a toll on you emotionally and physically, and over the long haul, it's going to show. There are studies that show that 50% or more of visits to physicians are for stress or emotional related causes. And you're probably thinking, wait a minute, I've never gone to my doctor for a stress or emotional issue. It may be showing up physically, but it could very well have an emotional basis. So let me give you an example of how that works. We're exposed to viruses and bacteria all the time, even cancer. You could be having a cancer cell pop up in your body every day. Those mutations occur anytime It's like, I like to think of it as the M&M factory. You know, they're producing billions of M&Ms that are rolling down the assembly line, but not every one of the M&Ms comes out right. You know, people are having to pick the deformed ones, you know, off the line. Because anytime you're recreating something thousands and millions of times, something can get screwed up. So as our cells are dividing in the body, we get these mutations and cancer can pop up. Every one of you have had cancer. Most of you are now going to say, no. My doctor's never told me I have cancer. And that's because your immune system attacked the cancer and killed it. When those mutations occur, when the cancer cells occur, the body recognizes it and it sends T cells to fight that. It's same thing when we get a virus. If you get a cold, it means that your immune system wasn't able to fight off the cold virus. But your spouse or somebody living with you or working with you may be exposed to the same thing, didn't get the cold. They probably were exposed about the same, but their immune system fought it off, and so it didn't take hold. And so that's what happens with us, again, with cancer. If the immune system isn't strong enough to fight it off, it may be a particularly rapid growing cancer, then it gets big enough that we just don't have enough of that army in us to fight it off. And then you go to the doctor and the test shows that you have cancer, okay? So you want your immune system functioning as well as it can be. That will help cut down on your chances for something like cancer or even for the common cold. Now, we don't know of any way yet to beef up our immune systems enough that that you just never get anything. But we do know that you can improve your chances by having a well-functioning immune system, and excessive stress suppresses the immune system. So you can't really see it in the moment. It's hard for you to recognize what's happening. But if you're feeling a lot of stress a lot of the time and you don't know how to come down from the stress after a bad call, then your immune system's going to be suppressed for a longer period of time, and then that leaves you susceptible. So learning to manage stress is one of the critical things you can do for help. Questions about that? Develop an internal locus of control. The simplest example I could give of that everybody recognizes is teenage peer pressure. When you were a teen, if you ever gave in to peer pressure, or maybe you were the guy or girl pressuring the others and they gave in, that's an external locus of control, your life being governed from the outside. Internal locus of control is about, I'm going to make my decisions, I live my life from inside me, not based on what other people think. Doing that tends to bring about a peace that does help to bring stress down and puts us in a better place. So developing that internal locus of control. A little bit related to that is a sense of meaning and purpose in life. People who have a sense of who they are, some sense of why they're on the planet, what they're about, tend to be emotionally healthier than those who don't feel that. So again, it can be tied a little bit to that internal locus of control. And having that is really something you develop. You're not born with it as a kid. 3-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds don't have a sense of meaning and purpose other than having fun and not getting in trouble. As you get older, it needs to move to something a little bit deeper. And so that's where you want to expand your life be living deep. Over 100 years ago, Henry David Thoreau, you may have heard this story about, he went out to live in the forest by himself, built his own cabin, planted his own garden. And when he was talking about why he did that, he said, I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life. He said something in there that I often see in therapy. He said, not when I come to die, discover that I have not lived. Sometimes I'll be treating older people and I'll hear this, or you'll hear it with your relatives. Oh, I wish I'd have done that. I always wanted to do that, and I never got around to it. Or, I regret not doing this. I just got in a rut and was living my life. And, so they're coming to that point of dying and realizing they never really lived. So Thoreau talks about facing that and finding out what life really is for you, and then living deep and sucking all the meaning out of life. So I'll throw this out to you maybe as a little bit of a benchmark. If you don't have at least 2 or 3 good hobbies or interests, things you like to do, you're probably not living as deep as you can. If you haven't developed a new interest or hobby or something in the last 5 years, you may be getting into a little bit of a rut. So maybe you have 2 or 3 good hobbies. Maybe you really like to camp and you go camping once or twice a month. But you've been doing that for 10 years and you never do anything else. You're probably missing out on something that would make your life a little richer, living a little deeper. So it doesn't mean you would give up on camping. You can keep that. You really love it. But you ask yourself, hey, what else is out there? What have I never tried? What have I never seen? What else might put a little pizzazz or a little interest in my life? So make sure you've got a rich life with some things going on, but don't just get in a rut once you find some things you like of never trying anything else. Okay, the next one is a tough one, especially for men. It's not all men are bad at this, not all women are good at this, but in general, women tend to do this a little better. And that is being connected. Close connections with other people. And my rule here is a minimum of 3 close, intimate relationships in your life. That's not a maximum, that's not an optimal number, that's the minimum. And here's what I think is going to surprise you. I told you that the number 1 factor for longevity was smoking or non-smoking for health and longevity. As we've gone through diet and exercise and sleep, you're probably thinking those are number 2, 3, and 4. They're not. This one is number 2. So if you were only going to do 2 things, if you said, okay, I don't want to be looking at everything, I only want to do 2 things to stay really healthy throughout my life, it would be not smoking, and the second one would be having a great support system, close emotional connections, a good network. This is fairly new information. We didn't know this even 10 and 15 years ago. We've known social connection was important, but the power of it has really come out of studies in the last 5, 6, and 7 years. Now, this is a tough one. If you're not eating right, you can change your diet today. If you're not exercising, you can start an exercise plan today. If you think there's a problem with your sleep, you can start working on that today. You might not be able to go out and make 3 really good friends today, though. This one's a little longer term. So you start by being open to it, open to the idea, recognizing that it can be beneficial to you, and then you start figuring out how to make that happen. And now we can come back to like the last one we talked about. So maybe it's finding a new activity where you may meet some people and some of them you'll connect with, okay? So that rule I'm giving you, it's just Dr. Doug's rule of a minimum of 3. A spouse could be one of those. Family members could be. But if all you have are connections in the family, it's usually not enough. And typically, you need at least 1 from each gender. If you're a guy, there's some great reasons to have a bunch of guy friends, but you might need a little bit of a feminine viewpoint in your life, and vice versa for females. And that's why 3 is a minimum, but not optimal. The more close relationships you have in your life, the more likely someone's going to be available if you need them, or that you'll have people who can meet whatever need it is at the time. I like to joke and laugh and have fun, and have some friends, a couple, they're hilarious. If I were feeling a little down, go to dinner with them. The whole restaurant will be looking at our table because we'll just be laughing. They should be in stand-up comedy. They're just funny. But I've never had a serious emotional conversation with them, or a philosophical thinking kind of conversation. So they can meet my need for humor, but they can't necessarily meet my need for emotion or for thinking. If you have a need for fun or you have a need for adventure, not everybody is into adventure. So the more people you have in your life, the more likely you'll be able to tap into some of the specific needs you have. Number 2, for health and longevity, being connected, having close people in your life, a really great support system. Questions with that?
Just when we had talked about this, some advice that you had given me was, in my particular situation, was get out of the house at least 2 or 3 times a month and go do something with a friend, someone other than your family or your wife. And that was helpful for me. That was one of the reasons I wanted spouses to come here, so that everyone can kind of see the big picture, so they can kind of help each other out with that. I think it's, especially for us, our wives, suffer much more than we do, so for us to give them the opportunity as well to go out.
Guys, if your spouse wants Girls' Day out, stand up and take care of the kids and clean the house. Ladies, if your husband wants boys' night out, wish him well and tell him to get home safely. Absolutely. Good point. The next one then is kind of related to that, but it's important enough to separate it, and that's emotional talk. Talking again about the immune system. So when I started doing therapy and people came to me and they seemed to be doing better, I thought it was because I was so darn smart. But sometimes you have a therapy session and it just doesn't feel like it's a very good one. I've had somebody leave and I'll think, man, I sucked. That was a crappy session, The next week they come back and I'm ready to apologize. I'm ready to say, I'm really sorry. I think I was off last week. That was a bad session. I probably shouldn't even charge you for But I'm too proud to say that. So I say something like, well, how did you feel when you left here last week? And I'm thinking they're going to say that was a crappy session, and then we'll process it, and maybe I will apologize, and we'll figure out how to make it better. But I've had people say something like, oh, Dr. Nielsen, I felt so much better when I left here last week. I felt great, and my whole week has been better. And I'm like, what? It's because of this. If they had the chance for some emotional talk, it has immediate benefits, and we now know that if we were doing a blood test on someone before they came to therapy, and then we were checking an hour or two after, we would see an increase in T cell production simply because of the emotional talk. A lot of people, guys especially, for example, think crying is bad. Typically, if someone has a good cry, we see an increase in immune system function afterwards. Now, if someone really close to you just died and you're crying and we test you, we're going to see a decrease in immune system functioning. Trauma, loss, stress, all decrease immune system functioning. I don't know of a study that would show this yet, but my suspicion is this, that if we could take the people who lost someone and didn't cry, and the people who lost someone and did cry, we would see less of a reduction in those who were having a good cry with it. Again, I can't prove that one, but that's my suspicion. Because we do know that if it's a good cry, even a happy cry, the birth of a child, things like that, we see immune system function go up. So again, you're making yourself less susceptible to the natural kind of diseases and things we face. And the more physically healthy you can be, then the more emotionally healthy you're probably going to be, and vice versa. You keep hearing me say that because the two are connected like that. The last one, I hope there aren't any pessimists in here. Have any of you in the last month, the last year, the last 2 years heard yourself saying out loud or in your head, man, the world is going to hell. Man, things are just really getting crappy.
Pretty sure they show that on the news every day.
Oh, okay. Thank you for saying that. Here's a tip I'm going to give you that I sometimes give patients. I think it's great to watch the news. As citizens in a democracy, you need to be informed, and some of that comes from watching the news or reading a newspaper. However, if there is a tsunami in Japan or an earthquake somewhere, wherever, just watch the news once for a half hour, an hour, whatever it is. If you're on CNN and there's just been a big natural disaster, or again, this is not out of a disrespect, but if you're watching about police officers being shot in Dallas, you should know that, and you should be tuned into that, and you should be feeling that. But don't watch 24-hour coverage of that, because what's happening with your brain every time they come on and show those, we have videos of everything now. It has the same reaction the second time you see it, the third time you see it, the fourth time you see it. Josh talked about how sometimes we start to, develop an immunity to it. But during those first days, every time you see that little homemade footage or professional footage, your brain is having the same kind of reaction as though it just happened again. And so you're not getting any more information all you're doing is creating more distress for you. And it promotes a belief that is out there widely that things are getting worse, that humanity is getting worse, that the country is getting worse, that the world is getting worse. The truth is that in history, it's always up and down. But if you look at the big picture, it's 2 steps forward and 1 back. 2 steps forward and 1 back. I talked about this at the beginning, partly because of you. We live at the safest time in history. Warren Buffett actually said this a few months ago. And he was talking about people who were talking doom and gloom. And he said, I would say that a child born in the United States of America in 2016 is the luckiest child ever born in the history of the earth. They will have more opportunity. They will probably live in more comfort. They will be more safe. They will have more opportunity to be themselves than being born at any other time in history. And so there are some challenges we face and some bad things that happen. And in your profession, as in my profession, if I base what's going on my day at work, things are pretty bad because everybody's depressed or anxious or has been abused or is abusing substances. I have to remind myself what I see in my office every day isn't a picture of the whole world. Your job and my job are in different ways, but are dealing with sadder things or, the tragedies and disasters. But overall, you women sitting in the room, 100 years ago, which is not that far from my lifetime. My parents were born 100 years ago. Wouldn't have had the vote. We'd be having a presidential election this year, and you guys would not have been able to vote. African Americans largely would not have been able to vote. Polio, other diseases would have been taking people. Wars were killing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Almost any measure you look at, we're better off today than we were 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 6 years ago, and going back. So if you're a pessimist, you're not seeing the whole picture. For those of you who are having children now, they are, if history continues as it has, they're going to have the best lives of any generation. Probably the same for their children. Now, that doesn't mean we can't recognize what we need to work on. Doesn't mean we shouldn't pay attention to the challenges that we do have, but you have to put them in perspective. And what happens now that didn't happen even 30 and 35 years ago, you didn't have 24-hour coverage. And if an earthquake or a tsunami happened in Indonesia, you might not even hear about it. You wouldn't even know. And there would have been less deaths if it had happened. As the earth becomes more populated, when there's a natural disaster, we have more deaths because there's so many more of us around. But if you put it all in perspective, it's a great time to be alive, and there's lots of reasons for hope. I have 7 grandchildren. I don't worry about their lives. I mean, you hope on a daily basis they don't get in an accident, that it's not, their house that catches fire, or, those isolated but, really kind of rare things compared. So yeah, I want them to be, but what a great time for a child to be born. Okay, 10 things. I promise you, if you work on all 10 of those, you're going to be in a healthier place emotionally, healthier place physically. It's going to help you do your job better. It's going to help you be a better husband, a better father, a better mom, a dad, son, daughter, friend. And you're not going to come to the end of your life saying, oh, whoops, I didn't actually live. Questions from anything? Yes?
What's the difference between going into a situation and dealing with it, the stuffing of it, stuff your emotions and just keep going, or the healthy part of it? Is that ignoring the fact that we just went into this stressful situation?
No, it's not. I'll give you a personal example. This is about a year and 3 months ago. 2:30 in the morning, I'm rushing to a house to deal with a suicide call. There's no way that I can really stuff that. Now, in the moment, while I'm there, I'm going to be in just functioning mode. Who needs help? How can I give that help? I'm not going to be totally tuned into my emotion, because I've got to do my job and function and be helpful. But afterwards, when I get home at 4:30 or 5 in the morning, I can't go back to sleep. I'm not in condition to sleep. So that's when I then say, okay, I can't just stuff this. Now I've got to deal with me and what went on. How did this impact me? How am I going to deal with it? Does that make sense? So momentarily, in the heat of the action, you may just be in full function mode, but at some point you step back and say, okay, I've just been through this experience. Trust me, as I'm driving there, I'm having that chemical release and all those things going on. I've got to come back, get my system back into stasis, get back in a better place for me. Does that answer the question? Okay. So yeah, in the moment, when you're manning the fire hose or doing whatever you're doing, you're probably not going to turn to your buddy and say, I'm feeling really stressed at the moment. But when you get back to the station, when you have a few minutes, then you say, hey, let's, what'd this do to me? How, what do I need to do to get back in a healthy place? Good question. Other questions? Okay. Well, thanks for spending this time and putting up with me. I hope it was helpful to you. And again, thank you for what you do to keep us safe, which helps us stay healthy. And I wish you all the best. There are a few handouts at the back. I didn't want to just kill Forrest and give them all to, but if you're interested in reading anything further, feel free to pick up handouts on anything you're interested in the back.